I know that chapter 12 is a list of 33 kings. It begins with Sihon and Og and the land east of the Jordan, which had already been conquered by Moses and distributed to 2.5 tribes. That in verses 9 through 16, we're going to look at 16 kings of the southern kingdom that were defeated. And then from verses 17 through 24, you have a list of 15 kings that mark the northern kingdom. And at first glance, I think many people read this and they look at it and they say, this is one of those chapters that, we can overlook it. It's just names. It's just, what happened. And we wonder, well, what really is the significance of this chapter? Why would God put it here? And here's where I'm coming from. If God decided that chapter 12 needed to be in the Bible, it's important enough for him, it needs to be important for us. And I believe there is some great significance in this chapter, and therefore we must look at it. And when you get through chapter 11, you will realize that chapter 11 was kind of the end of an era. And if you look at the book of Joshua, it kind of breaks it up. From chapter 11, or from chapter 12 on, I should say actually from chapter 13 on, no longer is the nation of Israel fighting for the land, but they're now going to be distributing the land. And so there's this natural break, but before there's that break, chapter 12 is in the middle to tie them both together. It's the end of an era, but it's also the beginning of a new one. And what chapter 12 is going to do, it's going to give us, I believe, a proper perspective of how we should live our lives today. It's a reminder that with new beginnings, what we're going to see is that God's work is bigger than us. And I love what Isaiah 43:18 and 19 says. We read this, it says, "Do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." So God's promises to us is that he does new things. But with that reality, we need to also understand that if God's going to do new things, that means that he's done doing these older things. And we kind of live in that time frame where we have to wrestle with that. Here he says, don't remember the former things. That doesn't mean we don't remember what God had done. That means we don't hold on to them so tightly as to never let them go in order to cling to what God is going to do and is doing in our midst. But before the land would be divided, God does 3 things. And that's what we're going to look at. That's what he's doing here for the children of Israel. And in the first 6 verses, what we're going to look at is the other side. What God did on the other side of the Jordan. And I kind of titled this group, the good old days. When Moses was the leader. Those good old days. And it says this, starting in verse 1. "These are the kings of the land whom the children of Israel defeated, and whose land they possessed on the other side of the Jordan, towards the rising of the sun, from the river Arnon to Mount Hermon, and all the eastern Jordan plain." And so there's 2 camps when it comes to this passage. Chapter 12, that is. They're either going to avoid it or idolize it. When you look at what God has done, we either avoid it or we idolize it. And if we were to avoid a passage like chapter 12, by just looking at them simply as names that we can forget, we've actually lost this. That those names are actually people that God knew, and they actually represent real people with real victories. And it's a reminder of how really faithful God is. These victories here, God intended to use for us. But not just for us, in particular for the nation of Israel at this time, because God was about to do something new. He was about to distribute their land. They were now going to have to go in and possess it. And in going and possessing it, you were going to see that there's still struggles that they had to. Yes, they were victorious over their land, but they had to claim it. All that God has for us is there for the claiming, but we have to claim it. And we got to hold on to the truth that God knows our names, like he knew the names of those who've gone before us. That great cloud of witnesses that's in Hebrews chapter 12. And we go and we claim the victory that God has for us. But just as dangerous as forgetting this is the danger of idolizing it. Napoleon Dynamite, one of the greatest movies ever. You just can't watch it alone. I'm just going to tell you that right now. When I first watched it, I watched it alone, and I thought, this is the dumbest movie I've ever seen. Until I realized that I went to school with somebody just like Napoleon. But I didn't realize that until I sat and watched it with somebody else and says, hey, remember so-and-so? He was, oh, yeah. But there's Uncle Rico. Everybody's got an Uncle Rico in their life, don't they? The guy that says, back in 85, if Coach would have put me in, we would have won state. Idolizing the good old days. We got to be careful of that. We don't live in 1985 any longer. Do you realize we don't even live in the 1900s any longer? We're in the 2000s. And it's crazy how quickly life goes by. It's crazy how fast we move on. Connie and I were talking this morning and realizing that Bret Hart had a graduation, and that was the final graduation of the kids that our kids went to school with. I'm like, wait a minute, how did that happen? Now we got to wait for GE's group to go before we start knowing these kids again. I'm like, man, I'm old. How did that happen? I didn't plan for being old. We had the preschool graduation. And after the preschool graduation means you have got to clean up. I hate cleaning up. But you got to do it. And at times when you're cleaning up, you begin to complain and think, man, is it really worth it? You know, as you're scrubbing floors and is it really worth it? And God's like, hey, I got something for you. He goes, remember Proverbs 14:4? I'm like, no, I don't. He goes, read it. Okay. Proverbs 14:4 says this, where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox. We can have clean stables, but you know what that means? We're not doing anything. But when God is moving, we're going to have dirty stables. God's doing something, but he strengthens us. And so there needs to be a balance. We need to look back and remember God's faithfulness. It's okay to say, man, those were good old days. I'm not saying to look back and say, oh, I hate those days. No, those were good days. Most of them. I know that because I've heard some of your stories. But we got to have a balance. Thank you, God, for the past victories. And then ask him to use them to encourage us to really follow God into the unknown. You see, the past is known, but what God is doing is still unknown. But what is not unknown is his character and his nature. And what we know moving into the unknown is that we may not know where we're going to end up, but we do know that the one who is faithful, who is loving, who is victorious, he's going to be with us. And that's what looking back does. And now we come to the list of kings. This wonderful list of names that you are going to love. One king was Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon and ruled half of Gilead from Aurora, which is by the bank of the river Arnon. From the middle of that river, even as far as the riverbank Jabbok, which is the border of the Amorites, and the eastern Jordan plain from the Sea of Chiraroth, as far as the Sea of Arba, the Salt Sea. Why didn't they just put the Salt Sea? I'm just curious. They could make my life easier. The road of Beth Shemesh, and southward below the slopes of Pisgah. The other kings was Og, the king of Bashan, and his territory was the remnant of the giants who dwelt at Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and reigned over Mount Hermon, over Salcah, over Bashan as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Mashanites, and over half of Gilead to the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. These Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel had conquered, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given it as a possession to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half the tribe of Manasseh. So you're probably now asking yourself, what in the world can we take from that? And I'm glad you asked that question. 2 Timothy 2:15 tells us this. It says, be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And what that means is we need to study God's word to understand what God is saying. So when we come to something like this, we can't just glaze over it. We need to dig into it. So what I did on your behalf is I did the heavy lifting. I looked up the meaning of every name. Don't be that impressed. It's not nearly as difficult as it was before. It used to be that it would take about 10 minutes to look up the meaning of every name. Now I just hover over the name and it tells me the definition. Right? So don't think I'm some spiritual giant. You too can do that, by the way. There's all kinds of free online Bible software. BlueLetterBible.com. Great one. Download it. Study. But as we look back at the victories God brought for the 2.5 tribes, what we're going to see is how God cares for his people, so much so that he is even bringing victory for them. So the real question is, what did God accomplish for those tribes, those 2.5 tribes that stayed on that side of the Jordan? And we get that by examining the victories, by looking at the names and what they mean. So, Sihon means warrior. Heshbon means stronghold. Gilead, a rocky region. Aurora, ruins. Arnon, rushing stream. Jabbok, emptying. Chisheroth, harps. Arbra, desert plain or wilderness. Beth-Shemesh, house of desolation. Og, the king, long-necked. I love that. Remember that cartoon Land Before Time? The long neck, that's what Bashan, fruitful. Ashtaroth, star. Edrei, goodly pasture. Salcah, migration. Geshurites, proud beholder. Machanites, pressure. Isn't that great? You're probably saying, okay, what are you getting at? You've lost it. But when we look back and we take the names and we find out what they mean and we put it all together, look at this. What did God bring victory over? The warriors, strongholds, rocky areas, ruins, rushing streams, emptiness, our pleasures, desert places, wilderness, the houses of desolation, long-necked, worldly fruitfulness, starry dreams, goodly pastures we become content with on our journey, and those who are proud and life's pleasures. Put them together, that's what you got. You see, the past isn't something to be avoided, nor is it something to be idolized. It's actually meant to be a springboard into the unknown. Because this is the foundation for who God is. This is what God always does. He brings victory over these things in our lives that sometimes hold us, that sometimes paralyze us. He springboards us into an unknown that says this: God is still our victory. The second thing that we're going to look at in verses 17 through 24 is the here and now. This is the land that was conquered but not yet occupied. This is what they have made available to them, but they haven't quite possessed it all yet. And you'll find as we come to this that it's going to look a lot like today. Verse 7, and these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel conquered on this side of the Jordan, on the west, from Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, as far as Mount Helak, and the ascent of Seir, which Joshua gave to the tribes of Israel as a possession according to their division, in the mountain country, in the lowlands, in the Jordan plain, in the slopes, in the wilderness, and in the south. The Hivites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So the first 6 verses looked at Israel's past. Now we're going to look at Israel's present. These would have been the fresh victories that they just had, the ones that would be on the forefront of their mind. And the first things mentioned here is the land, the names of the land. You have, Baal Gad, and you have Lebanon, you have, all those names. And here's what they mean. Baal Gad means Lord of Fortune. Lebanon is level valley. Helak, smooth or slippery. Seir, hairy or shaggy. Kind of fun names to get the meaning of. But what do we learn from this? What is it that God wants to show us? What is it that we can glean and take to help us move into the unknown? And this is what we know. God takes the land of fortune, level valleys, the smooth and slippery, and the hairy, shaggy places in our lives that we freshly occupied, and turns them into the place where the Lord dwells with us. But wait, there's more. Verse 9. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Jarmuth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. Come on, crowd participation. The king of Deber, there we go. The king of Geder, the king of Hormah, the king of Arad. What if it changes to 2? Are you guys going to get mixed up? It's like kind of like a bad joke. The king of Libnah, the king of Abdullah, the king of Makkedah, the king of Bethel. With a little more enthusiasm. Come on, 1. But isn't that how we read this? You come to it like, oh, here we go again. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tephah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, the king of Medon, 1. The king of Hazar, 1. The king of Shimron. What? Shimron, Meron, 1. The king of that guy. The king of Ternach, the king of Megiddo, the king of Kadesh, the king of Jecanoam in Carmel, not the one by the bay, but Carmel here, 1. The king of Dor in the heights of Dor, the king of the people of Gilgal, the king of Tirzah. All the kings are? Oh, I thought I was going to get you. But isn't it monotonous? Isn't it a drag? I thought it was so exciting. I totally geeked out over it. Can you guess what the key word that is repetitive might be? What do all these kings have in common? There was only one of them. There's only one of them. Which is a great reminder to us that we are going to have adversaries. We're going to have things, but they're one of a kind. And each battle that we fight is different. It's unique. And the one thing that doesn't change is the one God that we serve is always faithful to overcome the one. So we can't fight past battles with past weapons. We cling to the present God to fight present battles. But as we look at all these kings, we see Jericho, which means teaching of peace. Hebron, association. Jarmuth, heights. Lachish, invincible. Eglon, calf-like. Gezer, portion. Deber, sanctuary. Geder, wall. Hormah, devotion. Aphrid, a wild ass. Libnah, pavement. Abdullah, justice of the people. Makkedah, place of shepherds. Bethel, house of God. Tepar, the apple city. Heifer, a well. Aphek, enclosed. Lashbon, a plain. Madon, strife. Hazar, castle. Shimron, Meron. Watch height of Haran. Ash, Aphah. I shall be bewitched. Yeah, because your name, Tarach, Sandy. Megiddo, place of crowds. Kadesh, a holy place. Jokneam in Carmel, the people of lament. Dor, generations. Gilgal, a wheel rolling. Tisra, favorable. And again, taken by itself, you're looking at it like, what in the world? You've lost your mind. But when we put it together, what we will see is the here and now shows us, really, I believe, the current state of any nation or people group. It's what happens now, and it doesn't matter where you are. And here's what I mean. When we put it together, the heights that are calf-like from Egypt, which promise to be our portion, sanctuary, and a wall of security to those who are devoted to it. A place where the wild ass parades on the pavement of justice of the people to replace the lamb. Where they came to a place of shepherds, where God called the apple city, the wells, and the enclosures, where plains, strife, and castles are all heights to be possessed. When in reality, there are places where people will be bewitched, stuck in the sand, as they end up with crowds in what they call their holy places. Where the results are people lamenting for generations while stuck going in circles, hoping to be treated favorable. If that does not sound like the day we live in, I don't know what does. You see, the here and the now always looks the same. And the hope that we have is what Jesus tells us in John 16:33. Jesus says this, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace." Peace. Peace when? In the midst of that. We can have peace in the here and now. And then he goes on, he says, in the world you will have tribulation. Well, wait a minute, you just said I can have peace, but now you're telling me I'm having tribulation? But be of good cheer. I have overcome. God has overcome. Jesus has overcome. The here and now, it's not our destination, guys. This isn't the end of the story. This isn't where it ends. This is where we lay the foundation, though, for what? The next generation. I believe that chapter 12 is here to remind you and I that we're not just living for ourselves, but we need to be generationally mindseted. We need to look down the road. We need to lay the foundation that says God is still victorious. But what we are experiencing now is temporal, and that Jesus has already won the victory over the world, and that this isn't the end of our journey. It's been amazing to me, just a couple little things that, I was really frustrated this week, I'll just be honest, because things weren't going the way that I wanted them to, but my schedule kind of went other places, and it's just how it was. And I had to wrestle with it, but then I realized why. Because God had some illustrations he needed to show me. Two of them in particular, and you're going to say these are kind of weird ones, but they were illustrations for me. First one, Ron and I got in a fight over a motorcycle. I wanted to get a green one. He says, no, we got to get an old one. He goes, everybody's got a green one. Everybody's got a green bagger, but us old guys wish we had the one shovelhead that we sold before. And so as you walk up, you saw that yellow bike in there? 1977 shovelhead. So Ron's a little excited. He already broke it, so he'll be. But it's amazing. As we were having this conversation, we were talking and wrestling, and I know he was. We really weren't fighting, but kind of. But it's okay. Ron and I do that around the Refuge Run. But we were having this conversation, and then God said, "Hey, dummy, this is what I want you to know. The old generation needs the new generation. The new generation is going to buy those choppers that are all flamed out and big motors and loud and go really fast. And, it's all show and nothing else. No stories to it. Where those old bikes have a story. And as I listened to these guys talking as we were going to buy it, you realize that it's more than just a motorcycle. It's a story. It's a journey. It's where they've gone. It's where God's brought them from. And next weekend, when we see all these bikers here, it's a story. It's a story of God's redemption, a story of what God is doing. It's a 1970 shovelhead in the year 2023. And you look at some of these guys, and you're like, they're older than that 77, and I'm surprised they're still alive. And yet, there's something about us needing each other. We need the old. We need the new, and we got to come together. And we got to share stories. We can't be so stuck in the past that we don't listen to what's going on today, but we can't be so stuck in today that we don't listen to what's already happened. And I was really, for the car show, I was really frustrated. I was like, man, I had this car show group coming, and then they backed out, and then all of a sudden Dave says to me, he says, hey, I got old cars. Let me see what I can do. And he invited me to his house yesterday because his car show or his car group got together there. So we go to Greenhorn by the pool, and we drive up, and holy cow, there's like 9 million old cars. It was cool. And the first thing we saw, we're walking up, Connie and I, and there's this older guy kind of bending down, and I'm thinking, man, who's going to pick him up? And he's got his hood open, and there's this nice chrome motor, and he's talking about all the details to it, and it was like he was alive again. And so then I'm walking, and I'm looking, and I go to say hi to Dave, and I look at his garage. And I was like, holy cow, I've seen this house for years, and that's the most amazing. I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to covet. I'm confessing my sins right now. I'm coveting your garage. Like the spelling of my name, if you want to, leave it to me, like is S-H-A-W-N. I mean, holy cow. It's amazing. I mean, you walk in and you look, and on this lift in the back is this old car that he's restoring. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, that is cool. And Dave's sitting there smiling from ear to ear because all these people are looking at these cars. There was life everywhere. It was exciting. And so I asked him about that one. I said, what's that one? He goes, that's the one I'm building for my granddaughter. And it hit me. That's what it's all about. It's realizing that I've lived here. God's given me these passions, these desires. I've had great defeats, but I've had great victories. But yet, what I can do is I can take the gifts that God has given me. I can use them because there's a generation over here that needs me to. And I could do something, and I could pass it on. Guys, we need each other. It's not coincidence that all this happened, and this is the first Sunday that we come back together. And I really believe that God is doing something new, that there's something that he wants to do. And what we need to know is that what God is doing is bigger than all of us. But yet the foundation is still his faithfulness in our lives. And there is a generation that needs to know that there's a God that loves them, that pursues them. And then I want to go to chapter 13, verse 1. And what we're going to look at there is the not yet, reminding us that there's more work to be done. It says, now Joshua was old, advanced in years. I'm not going to say anything else. The Bible said it. And the Lord said to him, you are old, If God's telling you old, you're old. Like, you're old, advanced in years, and there remains very much land yet to be possessed. There's more work to be done. We live in the here and now, but yet in the not yet. God says, I'm going to do something new. It may be scary. It may make you uncomfortable. It's like when you first got your cell phone. You realized that you were old because you had to go to your grandkids to ask them how to make you work it. And some of you still today are doing it 10 years later. It might be scary. It might be uncomfortable. But you need the old generation, you young guys. You need the old guys. You need to hear about the 77 shovel heads. You need to ask about the scars on people's hands and knuckles from wrenching on cars. You need to hear of the past victories and know what people went through. Why? Because there's much land that needs to be possessed. And I believe that for our church right now, what God is doing is He's calling us into the unknown. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. We have no clue. He's calling us into the unknown where there is a generation that is swallowing hook, line, and sinkers, the lies of the kings of this world, and they're feeding on them. And they're not people that need to be avoided. You may not understand it. You may not get why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm going to tell you something, they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. But they're not a people that need to be avoided. They're a people that need to be loved. And what God is doing is He's thrusting us into the unknown with the love of God to embrace them. So that the God that has brought us past victories and has given us a present day to live in, to give them a future and a hope. A future that says the God that brought me victory can bring you victory. The God that loves me can love you, and He still loves you, and He's pursuing you. Because you know what? Whether you like it or not, they're your kids, your grandkids, and your great-grandkids. And they're their friends. And they're the preschoolers that we just graduated. They're the graduating class of 2023. They're your neighbors. They're your nephews, your nieces. And they may tell you that they don't want to hear from you, but I'll tell you this, that's a lie. Because what they're longing for is that you will share your stories, that you will share your life, and that you will love them. That's why Paul in Titus tells us in chapter 2, verse 1 through 8, he says, but as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine, that older man be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, and patient, that the older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may admonish young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Likewise, exhort the young men, be sober-minded in all things. Show yourself to be a pattern of good works in doctrine, showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say about you. Now we look at that again, you look, oh, wait a minute, I don't like that one. Of course you don't, because you're running it through the filter of the world. Run it through the filter of a loving God, and here's what you'll hear. Older men, older women, love the younger generation. Teach them. Younger generation, you need to listen to the older generation because they have stories to tell you of God's faithfulness. And then study it. Tear apart these words. Wrestle through the words you don't like in that passage. And let God bring you to a place where you understand who he is and what he's doing. But yet, what we tend to do is we tend to choose sides to dwell in. One side of the Jordan or the other. So which side is it? Are you going to dwell in the good old days? Are you going to be satisfied with present victories? Which one's it going to be? Or, because there's a third option. God, thank you for the good old days. Thank you for the present victories. But God, I want to follow you into the unknown. And I don't know what it's going to look like. And I might be afraid. And I may not be comfortable. But yet I'm going to trust that you are always with me. You see, Israel had to look back and remember God's faithfulness. The faithfulness that God recorded in chapter 12. So that you and I could do the same. We can look back and see God's faithfulness. And then they were to look at the present and see what God had done. But then he reminded them that there was very much land to possess. Focusing them on the future, reminding them that God is still working today. And guys, I want to leave you with this. There's still much land to possess. And I believe what Jesus is asking you today is this. Will you follow me into the unknown and not avoid a people group, but love them like I love them? Because I'm still at work and I'm still doing what I've always done. And I'm still bringing victories. Guys, we need each other. Our generation needs us. And God is with us to strengthen us, to do things we never thought we'd ever be able to do. Because he's the same yesterday, today, and forever.